In this session, we will cover what are form validations in Angular and how we can use the validations with reactive form in Angular application. Before I start this tutorial, I would like to request you, if you have still not subscribed to this channel, then please subscribe to it and don't forget to click on the notification bell icon to get notification whenever I upload a new video on this channel. So let's start the tutorial. One of the most common features in any web application is providing a form to user to input some data. And it's also very important to restrict the user to enter only a valid information. The traditional way to validate the HTML form is by using JavaScript custom functions, which are time consuming and most of time are not user friendly. But Angular these days provide excellent support for validating user inputs because of its full-fledged framework and displaying the validation message at same time. It has lots of commonly used built-in validator that you can use easily. In reactive form, instead of using ng model directive to get values, we used form control name with controls. And instead of adding validators through attributes in template, we add validator functions directly to the form control model in component class, and Angular then call these functions whenever the value of control changes. With reactive form, we can use few other properties to get or set the values, like the get is used to get the values from form control using its form control name. Also, setValue and patchValue is used to set the initial value at the time of our form load on our browser. Value change and status change emit the event every time when the value or status of control changes. So let's open Visual Studio Code and see a practical examples of validations in reactive forms. Here I am using the project on which we worked with the form in Angular with reactive forms, and I am going to add the validation on the same application. If you have not watched that video or do not aware about the reactive forms, then please watch that video. You can get the link in the description of this video. Here I already opened the file, the HTML and the source code file of reactive forms. Here you can check that we are using form group for reactive forms, and using this form group we can apply all the validation using the form control class from here. So in our video we also discuss about the different way of initializing the controls on a form, so that's why the code is commented here. So for now we do not require this code, so let me remove this, and also let me open the terminal window and execute the ng-sub command. So the application is compiled successfully, and let's open the browser. So here you can see that application is already running on port 4200, and here you can see that the keyword mark has already been entered in first name. So why? Because we have initialized the initial value of this control, the first name. So let me close this Explorer, and we can also apply our validation with this class, the form control class. So how we can do this? Let me show you. So in form control, the first overload method is where you can add the initial value. You can either set it to blank or you can also apply an initial value. Like for now, let's leave it as blank, and then you can apply your other validations here within array, because we are going to apply more than one validation on this first name. So how we can apply this? So if you remember, we already discussed that using the validators we can add all the validation in this control. So for this, first of all, I have to write here validators, and we also need to import it from Angular Forms, and then we can add all the validations here. Like you can see that in this list, email length, max length, min length. So first of all, every form, every control in this form is a required field. So for that we need to add this required, and then using the comma separator we can add the another validators like validators dot, let's assign its length as max length to 10, and the same way for this email id let's assign its initial value as blank, and then using validators dot required, and also it's an email field so we can assign it as validates dot email. The same way last name is also a required field. Let's copy it. Now all the fields are required according to the validation provided with the form control class. So if you notice that we have already added this required field here. So using this required field, the form register form button is still disabled. But now we have applied the required field from server side, so now we can remove it from here. Let's save it again, and you can see that button is still disabled because the form is still not valid. Now let's open the inspect elementor developer tool. Now check the value of this form, that you can see that the classes is already applied to here: untouched, pristine, invalid. So if you have not aware about these classes, then please watch our previous video. We discussed all these classes in our validation with template driven forms in our previous video. So let's say if I add the values in it, like first name is wave, last name is tutorials, wave tutorials at outlook.com, and the button register button is get enabled. So if you notice that all the fields are valid, so if I remove it, it get disabled again. So and also the email id is a email type of control. So if I type here wave tutorials and till I did not add any single char, it will not approve this form. The button will get disabled, and whenever I type any character beyond the at the rate like outlook, it will get enabled. That means the form is in a valid state. You can see here that the form is currently in a valid state. And we can click on this register button and the form is get submitted, and you can see the values. We can see here whatever the value submitted to this form. The validations I show you right now are the client side validation. So you can add these validations according to the requirement. For example, why we use reactive forms? Because in reactive form it allows us to add the validation during the form is creating. For example, you have a control parent and where you can decide that at runtime whatever the max length, minimum length, or if this form is required, not required, all the things you mention in a control parent, and the same value gets saved in database. And whenever you load the values from database, you can control the values from the server side code here. Actually these are the client side validation, but you can also apply the server side validation. Like whenever a user submit a form, you can also validate the values at the time of submission or before submit it to the database. So here you can check that we using this form user registration, the method here, and receive all the form values in it. And here we can, before submitting the values to the database, we can validate all our validations here. Let me show you this as well. If let's apply it for last name, the form values dot control dot last name dot length. If it's less than or equal to 5, then it will return the statement from here, and also we can display the message to the user like last name should be more than 5 char in length. And to display the message, you know that we can use the two-way or single-way binding. So here I am using the interpolation to display the message in the form, and let's create a local variable here, validation message type of string, and assign the default value as null. So let's use this variable to pass the message, this dot validation message equal to the message, and let's create interpolation here, and let's save all the changes. Let me close this, and let's add the first name, and instead of 5 characters, let me add the 4 characters here, and last name at outlook.com, and let's remove few chars from here so that its length will get decreased below 5. And whenever I click here the register button, you can see that on server side, after submitting the form, we received a message that last name should be more than 5 char in length. So let's add the full last name, WaveTutorials at outlook.com, and the first name last name is WaveTutorials, and now click on register button and the form is submitted. So here the message is not get reset, so you can apply after we validate the form. If it's true, then before submitting the data or after submitting the data, you can also add the default value to it like this. Let's reload the form again, and now and if I press the register button, and the form is submitted to the database, and now the validation message is again reset to blank. So it's a simple way you can do this. Now we have learned that how we can apply client side and as well as server side validation. But if you remember, we use the template driven form to display the validation message through HTML. So you can also achieve the same thing using the Reactive Form. So this is the advantage of Reactive Form, that you can also use the validation at the time of the page is initialized, the client side validation using HTML form, and as well as from server side. That's why most of the time the Reactive Form is recommended for the large forms. If your form is a small form, then you can use a template driven form, but if it's a large or a dynamic form, then it's a best practice to use the Reactive Form. So now let me show you how we can achieve the validation or display the validation message to a user from the HTML page. So for this, let's open the Reactive Form Control HTML page, and I would like to show you the HTML page of template form. So here, if you notice that we applied two validations, like here we validate it like email ID is required and check the validate email using the local variable, and the same thing we did to apply the classes for if this control is invalid or a valid. These are the name of the classes. We used it with ng class properties. So the same thing we can also achieve with the Reactive Forms. So how we can do this, let me show you. So first of all, let's open our reactive form component HTML page. So here instead of ng model we have form control name, and we can get the value it from our control name. So for this, what we can do, we can create a get property here like get, and we can give any name to it like underscore first name, and then what we can do, we can return this dot and then the name of the form, register user form dot get. And here what get will do, get will get all the properties, all the values, whatever we required from the control, and here we need to pass the name of the control, and the name of the control is right now is first name, because we are going to apply validation on first name. So here we can use the same property name first name to check that whether this control is valid, invalid, touched, untouched, or whatever we need to apply it on a form. So let's add a div here and type if condition ng if, and we can check whether first name is, if it's invalid, and first name is dirty, or first name is touched, then what we will do, we will display a message that first name is required. Let's save all the changes. And here when I click in first name and click outside the control, then you can see that first name is required message is displaying here. Now you can also achieve the same thing using the form control name, this register user form, if you are not going to use this get property. So now let me add another div here, and let me show how we can achieve it using this form group name. Here let's type ng if, and then the name of this form dot controls, and here we can get the list of all the controls, and whatever the controls we need to validate we can pass its name. So its form control name is first name within single quote here, and we can check it for invalid, and also we can do the same thing we did it using the get property. So instead of this first name we have to replace it with this, and now instead of this first name let's display first name is required using form name. So let's save it, and here you can see that both the message are going to display. So you can see that we can achieve it from either of any way. One more thing, if you remember that we used few classes to make the border of this control red or green. If the value of this control is invalid, then the border of control will get red, and if it's a valid, then the border of this control will get green. So here in template driven form we use this ng class, and we can also use the same syntax with the reactive form. So let me copy this to save some time and add it here, and instead of this first name control we can replace this either with this or with this. So for now let's copy this first name and replace it with first name control here, and we also need to add these classes in our project. So let's add a new file here. And add the classes to this CSS file. Like I copied it from the template driven form CSS file and paste it here. Let's save the file, and in our source code, instead of the styles, let's add style URLs and pass the name of that CSS class. Let's save all the changes. Now when I click in this control, then it will get red and all the messages you can see here. And when I put any information here, like I add its first name and click outside it, its border get green. So you can see here that we have applied the classes. We did it in a template form. The same way we can also use the validation and displaying the validation message with the reactive form as well. Now my other requirement is whenever I submit the form will get automatically filled with the default values. So how we can achieve this? For this, you can also add few default values when we reset the form. So here you can see that whenever users submit the form is get reset automatically, and here you can also pass the default values to this form. So here the name of this control is first name, and here you can assign any value to it. That value after submitting. So let's save it. Now you can see that whenever I submit the form, this text will get automatically populate in this control. Here you can see that we can also reset the value. So for now, let me comment this, and now our next requirement is I would like to set the default values. So there are two ways to set the default values. Either you can use this form control and set values here like wave, and you can also set the default values using setValue and patchValues. So here within this ng on init, we can use with the name of this form this dot registration user form dot set value and set its value like first name, and its first name will be wave. Email ID wave. Now we do not require this value as the initial value, so let's save it. And you can see that using setValue we set all its initial default values in this form, but we can also use the patchValue here, and it's doing the same thing we achieve it with setValue. But the only difference is using patchValue, if I remove this email ID from here, it will allow me to add first name and last name and remove the email ID. So it's not required to fill the email ID using patchValue. But if I use the same setValue and going to save this, it will give an error. And let's open the inspect element, and here you can see that must supply a value for form control with the name email ID, because if we are using setValue, we have to pass values, the default values, to all the controls we used in this form. So that's why we have to pass email ID as well with setValue. As you can see that error has been gone and the value has been set here. We also have two other properties, value change and status change, which emit event every time whenever the value and status of control changes. So let's see an example of this as well. So the same way within the ng on init, let's use this dot registration user form dot value changes, and we need to subscribe it dot subscribe and create an arrow function here. And here let's type console.log and first name value change, because the value changes is emit of the event whenever the value of this control has been changed. And here let's add x dot and then the name of the control, first name. Let's save the changes and let's open the inspect element. And here within control, whenever I make any changes here, you can see that we can receive the event whenever we change the value. And the same way we can use status change to check the status of the form, or as well as for each control. So for now, first of all, let's check the status for form, and here replace the value changes with status changes, and here form status, and remove this first name because we are going to check the status of the form. And also let's comment the above console. Let's save it, and you can see that if I remove any single character, the status of form is still valid. If I remove all the values, the form status shown here is invalid. And again, if I add a single character, the form status is again valid. Here we use status changes to check the status of a form, but what if we would like to check the status of a control? Then for that you can write it like registration form, and we can use the get like we use here to get a single control, and we can use here get, and within the round brackets we can pass the name of the control like first name. And now first name status can be shown here. So let's save it, and also, and if I remove its value, you can see here that first name status is valid and form status is still valid. Now till I remove all the values from here, now first name status is invalid and also the form status is invalid. Now let's comment it for now, and I will show you again. Still first name status is valid, and now it's invalid. With the help of value change, we can also check the value changes for all the controls. Like instead of checking the value change for a single control, we can check it for all the form. So let's comment the other consoles, and here let's remove this x dot first name and we'll use x only, because we are going to show the value changes for all the controls in the form. But here X is an object, then we have to stringify it with the help of JSON.stringify and cover it within a round bracket. Let's save it. Now whenever I change any value here, you can see that we can see an object of all the controls and the value has been changed to WAV instead of WAVE. Let me change form value changes, save it, and let me show you again. Whenever I change any values, let me expand it a little bit. You can see the values is going to change, and we can see all the changes on this form. So in this tutorial with Reactive Form, we checked how we can get the values of each control using this form, and also how we can set or patch the value, what is the difference in between set and patch value, what is value change, and what is status change. So we have covered what are the form validations and see a practical example how we can use the validation on HTML page on client side or as well as on server side using React Forms in an Angular application. If you still have a question or query, just write a comment in a comment box, or you can also write to me at wavetutorials@outlook.com. If you need the source code, then please check the GitHub link in the description of this video. And if you like the video, then please give a like to this video. My name is Naveen and thank you for watching this tutorial.